every now and then they like to show you up and try to embarrass you and come with some biblical things and say you go to church and you didn't know that. You may not have ever encountered that, but they will do it. They will do it. At this time, we are continuing. First of all, I want to find out, does anybody have any questions or concerns of some things that they wanted to get more information on, since we're right up to Christmas, so everything about Christmas, we wanted to talk about it. We talked about the biblical Christmas, and we're going to spend some time talking about the secular Christmas that gets more attention. Amen. Anybody have questions, concerns about anything we talked about or anything that has come across your path that you do want to talk about? We're going to utilize that time to talk about what you want to talk about, and then I'm going to give you some more things that are not biblical, because you hear about more non-biblical stuff than you do biblical. And we want to highlight some of that. We're doing it for your benefit. Amen. Because we've established the truth. If you already know the truth, then the rest of the stuff shouldn't matter. We don't want you to be knowledgeable of the rest of the stuff and not know the biblical truth. So we gave you the biblical truth so that you have a defense against all this other stuff that will come about. Questions, comments? Okay. We don't have a, okay. Yes, sir.
Okay. So just as you stated, it's amazing how, like you said, you got other people that know more about the Bible about certain things, but like you said, we have to know how to write the Bible for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm saying in my understanding, and I'm gonna make this short so we're not spending all night on this here. So when we pass, the way I understand it, when we actually pass right now, until the Lord has sound trumpet, we are, and again, this is just my understanding.
Okay.
We are in a, I'm gonna say a holding pattern.
Suspended animation.
Suspended animation, okay.
That's the best way to put it.
Okay, so suspended animation. So we're in that suspended animation until that trumpet is sound. And everyone, well, let me phrase it. When that trumpet is sound, those that are dead and gone, well, they're dead, will rise above first. And then those that are still alive will be caught up at that time.
That's Thessalonians, if we want to read it. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so
You're saying it exactly right.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I am on the right path of the way I'm thinking in my head. That no one has no one is in heaven right now. That we will always be, again, like I said, it will be I'm gonna say two phases. If I make no mistake, if there be two phases of I'm gonna say resurrection. There'll be two phases. Again, those that are dead in Christ will rise first, and then after that, the rest of them,
Be caught up to meet him in the air.
Okay, so let me ask this question.
Okay.
Now, I know once before you had mentioned about we had spoke about purgatory. Now, I believe those that have not believed what I just made a mention of would think that there is something of a purgatory or something of that effect. And the reason why I asked that is here. I had a Catholic person that was talking.
All right. Now, I'll highlight that.
Yeah.
He said that a Catholic person is telling him about this situation. Go ahead.
Because they asked me my opinion, and what I just stated was what
Catholics have a
Different.
they have a view of purgatory.
Got it.
It has been taught
Okay.
in
We on the right track.
it has been taught in Catholicism.
We on the right. Okay, so we on the right track. We on the right track. So the individual was asking me. So are you saying they would ask me? So you saying there's a purgatory? I said no. I didn't say that. I say right now we are dating in Christ. Well, like you said, would be absent from the body and be present with the Lord. I said, but I don't believe right now that no one is with the Lord just yet. I
We,
said,
we can count 1, 2. You know, I mean, if we really want to get Enoch is he never died, and he was raptured, just like some of us will be raptured. So we know he was raptured, and we know that the prophet Elijah was caught up, and so they never died, and so those would be exceptions.
okay.
Those would be exceptions,
Okay.
but everybody else, and our great grandma not there.
Okay. We on the right.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
All right. Now, and so, and that person is trying to say, okay, well they're somewhere holding. Well, I oftentimes use this same example because a writer named is his name Washington Irving? Well, anyway, he must have been a theologian because he wrote something about. Well, he also wrote about Ichabod Crane, but he wrote about the name of the individual, his character. He slept for 20 years. Yeah, it's Rip Van Winkle. Rip Van Winkle and Ichabod Crane were written by the same person. Same. All right. In other words, Rip Van Winkle slept 20 years, and when he woke up, he didn't know that things had changed. In other words, he went to sleep. King George was the king of England and in charge of the colonies. But when he woke up, George Washington was the president. So he was confused about that. The thing is, and I try to use the same, if you keep that in mind, if you ever read the story, then you'll find out, see, I've forgotten more stuff than I know. All right? But here's what happened. If you go to sleep, you're really tired, you go to sleep, and you wake up, you don't know how long you slept. You don't know how long if nobody were to bother you, you might be the next day before you acknowledge it. So when you go to sleep, and when you wake up, you don't know how much time has expired. When a person in the Lord goes to sleep, and that's why I use that term suspended animation. When they go to sleep, the first thing they see when they open their eyes is going to be Jesus. So to them, it could be, they just thought maybe just a moment, just a twinkling of an eye, just dozed off to sleep. And when I opened my eyes, it was Jesus. It could have been 100 years ago. Could have been 1,000 years ago. But when they wake, in other words, there's no time that they know about between the time that they closed their eyes and open again, they saw Jesus. So that's why when we see Jesus, it doesn't matter how long our eyes have been closed because we don't know. It could have been, we just like Rip Van Winkle, we just went to sleep and we didn't know we slept 20 years. We didn't know we slept 1,000 years. A day unto the Lord is as 1,000 years. So you just went to sleep, and when you that's why they say Paul utilizes the term for Christians who have died in Christ that they sleep, because that's the concept. And I use all of those kind of examples to help explain it to people, because some people have never read anything about it. I'm trying to think, his name is Washington Irving. Is that right, Miss Newton? Yeah. And he wrote Rip Van Winkle and about the headless horse and all that. Those are two separate things, but they were same genre. But that concept of him going to sleep and waking up not knowing that it's too hot, and waking up, he didn't know that he had slept 20 years. And if you go to sleep and you wake up, you don't know how long you slept unless somebody tell you. It all depends if you just are tired and nobody's around and you go to sleep, you may think you're going to get a 15-minute hour nap, and the sun done gone down and everything, and might have came back up again before you realize that that's what transpired. So does that help what you're saying? Yeah, that's just my term, because the Bible ain't gonna say that. And then these science fiction movies, they have a good concept of Christianity and the things that happen, because they're going to send you on a trip that takes light years, and they put everybody to sleep on the spaceship, or they're going to be traveling for years and years and years. They're using a concept that haven't even been, nobody's doing that. But God is already, that they get the understanding that if you put somebody to sleep, and then, of course, it take them 20 years to get to where they're going. I know there are a couple of movies that have been out like that, science fiction, that talk about that. And then there's some that somebody woke them up before time and all that. But anyway, the fact that we don't know how long we sleep unless we time it, because if you just go to sleep, you don't know. You're in the image of death when you sleep. That's why, sometimes theologians pick that up in their prayer. Lord, I was laying in the image of death, and you allowed me to awaken. Because when you go to sleep, it's the same as dead in the perspective. Say they are now asleep. They're sleeping in heavenly peace. But they're not dreaming. So that's the difference. Okay. Right. Now the body is deteriorating, but the body is not you. The body is just a house that you abide in. In other words, when they say ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the body will go back to its original state, which is all from the dirt, the dust of the earth. But everybody's spirit, the soul man, is unique. But then again, that's why when we are in the image of God, it's talking about our spirit. Because all of us, we say we're in the image of God, and you look around, ain't nobody in here looking alike. But our spiritual being looks like God. Okay. That's a whole nother subject, but that's. Mm-hmm. Right. Can you imagine that if you just take him for instance, take for example, this is too hot. The example is that yeah, threw me off. Let me get my mind straight again. That keep in mind that everybody doesn't know what I'm talking about. Everybody does not know what I'm talking about. And unless you can rightly divide the word, they won't ever hear this because unfortunately a lot of preachers are doing eulogies and saying your mama looking down from heaven at you, and you know your mom and your daddy and all them looking down from heaven at you, and they're telling a lie. And people don't know any better. They say, okay, that's true. But if heaven is a place where there's no more crying, no more grief, and your grandmama looking down at her grandchildren and see that they don't have no chance of getting to heaven the way they live, is she going to be happy? So they can't be aware of what we're going through here. And so if they were aware of what we're going through here, they wouldn't be happy. And so that would contradict what heaven is supposed to be, a place where there's no more sadness. No, there's nothing but joy, no more crying, no more dying, none of that. So when people are saying, your mama up in heaven looking down on us, no, that can't be. All right, so it's hard for people to understand that concept because somebody been teaching them that all their life. Your mama looking down to heaven at you and you got to get straightened up. Well, no, if they were looking down to heaven, they wouldn't be happy. They'll be like the man that Jesus is talking about, and Jesus was using an example that is not really reality. He was using an example. A lot of times he used examples based on what people believed. Because there was a man who was in the midst of hell. And he said, can you get Lazarus to go back and tell my brothers that straighten up so they won't come here? So no, we can't send nobody back to do that. So if they didn't believe him while he was living, he didn't believe the prophet while he was living, they ain't going to believe him if I send somebody from the dead back. So that was just something that was an example of what people believed then. And some people still believe that now, that there are people, that somebody's up in heaven looking at you and somebody in hell looking at you. And here's the other thing. The same people who died, who are not in the bosom of, who are not in the Lord, they will have a reckoning time too. They won't hear the trumpet sound. I know we're in a whole nother genre now. They won't hear that trumpet sound. You can't hear that trumpet sound unless you've already been in tune with who God is. All right, you can't even hear it. I don't care. It sounds so loud to wake up the dead. It only wakes up the dead in Christ, those who are sleeping in Christ. And they will be caught up to meet him, and those who yet remain will be caught up. So what about the other folk? They didn't hear it, and those who died, they didn't hear it. But it says when we're in the presence of God, it says that here comes the second resurrection. Read this in Revelation. It said this is the second resurrection. It said the sea gave up its dead. And the earth everybody came up and stood before Christ. In other words, all those who were not in Christ, all of them who had not been written in the Lamb's Book of Life, all of them stand before the millions, multitudes, ever how many there are. I mean, we got plenty of time. I mean, we're going to hear every one of them try to explain why they live like they live and why they didn't change. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, there are no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. So Okay, we're going to listen to everybody try to give an explanation as to why they weren't in the first resurrection. Okay, that's a whole nother, so we'll do that at some point in time. But anybody don't understand what I'm saying at all, then I'll talk about it. But because there are two resurrections, we're in the first one. We will be in the first one. If you're in the Lamb's Book of Life, your name is written. You're in the first resurrection. You heard the trumpet sound. But everybody in the world did not hear it. You say it sounds so loud, it will wake up the dead. Well, it didn't wake up the dead who didn't die in Christ. They didn't hear it. And even the people walking around, they don't hear it. There'll be people caught up to meet him in the air, and they'll be wondering what's going on. Back in the early 70s, a friend of mine, he passed away a few years ago. He was a preacher. He wrote it during the time he was a college student. He wrote the pitch, we did a live play about the resurrection. It just so happened that I was a television announcer who didn't get caught up because I was on television talking about so many people are missing and people can't explain it. Said that the airplanes were falling out of the sky because some of the pilots were caught up, and so many accidents because the drivers were caught up, and they can't explain everybody, what happened. And there was a conspiracy theory that something was happening because some people woke up in the morning and the people that's supposed to have been in their household or in their bed weren't there. And so all of this happened the same day. So I'm announcing, talking about it on the news. And then somebody said, well, my grandmama said that was going to happen. And we were interviewing people who said, well, my grandmama said it was going to happen. And we just didn't believe it. And so they made it real. He made it real. Because that's how it's going to be, the day after. And they wonder what's going on, and they're going to start a whole nother, they're going to try to start a whole nother civilization. The same people, they're going to, do something different and whatever, and Satan is going to take complete control over who's left. And they really are going to go wild then, but that's a whole nother stuff. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Death is just that portal that's the transformation because when people understand that to pass from life to death is just a transition, when they understand that ahead of time, then death is not an enemy. So the transition is something that we would be welcoming when we get to the point of knowing who God is. It's a welcome transition. Okay. Mm-hmm. assured in knowing that there's a transition coming. So,
I don't know if you did this already.
go ahead.
Absent from the body,
To be present with the
present
Lord.
with the Lord. Elaborated by 1 Thessalonians 5. When he comes back, the dead who have died, he brings them back with him. So those souls have gone with him, and he's bringing them back with him. And then the bodies are going to be caught up in the air.
But they'll be transformed.
Transformed in there. So let me read that verse.
Yeah. In other words, when we start talking about the incorruptible to change to incorruptible, now that's in Corinthians that they're talking about. But the concepts, we have to put all those concepts together. But yes, we do understand that to be absent from the body, be present with the Lord.
That soul has gone with him. And when he comes back in the air, he's bringing them back. He said he's going to bring them back with him. And so thus, when the bodies are going to be transformed back in there with him, everybody's going to get their new body back.
And the more we'll get into those as a particular subject matter, because we don't, because living to please God is when we were talking about 1 Thessalonians, and it goes right into to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord, and it goes on to tell us all of those concepts. But we do want you to know that there's nobody in heaven looking down on you. Okay. Was there another question or concept? Or we were trying to make sure, I know we got some other questions, but we were trying to close out on everything Christmas. So we did get everything about Jesus, the foretelling, when he was going to, where he was going to be born, and the place, and we got all of the depictions of the where, who was actually there, what happened, and all of that. Even though it's not contained in any one book. It's not in one book. You have to just lay it out and drop the actual title of the book and look at the events. If we looked at the events, you would see that they cross over multiple books. In fact, it's going to, talk about Isaiah, Micah, the prophet Micah. It's going to go to Matthew. It's going to go to Luke. And then it's going to come back to Matthew to make the complete story. But no one writer has the whole story. We understand that. I hope so. Okay? Now, how did we get all of this other stuff about Christmas? Well, first of all, most people don't know that the poinsettia had nothing to do with Christ. In fact, had nothing to do with Christmas. It comes from Mexico. The original poinsettia originates in Mexico. And actually what was happening was given. It was given as a gift to an ambassador, and they brought it, to the White House and to Washington, D.C., and over time, that got to be sort of a symbol for Christmas because it has the red and the green in it, and we adopted red and green to be our Christmas colors. But poinsettias, where did I have that? Poinsettia. It came to America in 1828. Before then, nobody had never used poinsettias as a representation of Christmas. And now, you can't go anywhere in the United States without seeing poinsettias representing Christmas. In fact, they don't do it in other countries. Poinsettia is just something that we do here in America. And it comes from Mexico, and they don't use poinsettias as a Christmas symbol in Mexico. We use it here in the United States. He brought the plants, this ambassador, and the Mexicans in the 18th century, those plants were symbolic of the Star of Bethlehem. That's what they see. They see in it a star. No, we don't have one in here. But it has a star in it. They say it's supposed to represent the Star of Bethlehem. And that's how they associate it with Christmas. The actual flower of the poinsettia is yellow. But the surrounding that flower are bright red leaves. And they say that those are the petals. They're not the petals. They're actually the leaves. Okay. So you know a little bit about the poinsettia and how it got to be 1828 before they adopted in America the use of the poinsettia. What about the Christmas tree? Had nothing to do with Christ. It was the people in Germany in the 16th century who started decorating fir trees, evergreen trees, because it was still green in the wintertime. So they wanted to have a green tree, and they kind of associated it with Martin Luther, who was a German theologian. And they kind of had those fir trees, and they put some candles in them and made them so that they could be brightened up during the Christmas season. The Christmas tree was not widely used in Great Britain until the 1900s, and it was brought to America by the Pennsylvania Germans in the 1820s. So prior to 1820, we didn't have any kind of tree representing Christmas. Let me tell you this. You remember in 1620 when the Pilgrims came to America, and they are that's where we get the first Thanksgiving from those Pilgrims. They did not celebrate Christmas. Christmas to them was a pagan holiday. Christmas to them was a pagan holiday. They didn't celebrate Christmas. Those people in that was Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts. For a long time, the people in New England did not celebrate Christmas in December because it was pagan. And of course, we know that the origins of Christmas, as we celebrate it in December, is pagan, because there's nothing that depicts Jesus being born in a wintertime of December. Nothing. That was something that we added later on. In fact, I tried to explain on one occasion that the reason we get that December holiday is because the people of Northern Europe celebrated the Northern Lights that come up during the time of the winter solstice. During this period of time, if you go to anywhere in Scandinavia, you will see a lot of lights in the sky. It's beautiful. The light is lighted up. Well, the ancient people, before they were introduced to Christianity, they worshiped that time. They worshiped that time of the year, and that was their God. They had a festive season around this time in December. And if you notice, this is the time that the official wintertime comes in. It's the time that the season changes. These people celebrated that season change, and they saw all of these atmospheric things going on, and they made that their special day. Well, when Christianity came to that part of the world, keep in mind that Christianity did not originate in Europe. It originated in Asia. But when it came, by the time the Roman Catholics got it and brought it into Europe, they went to all of these people who they call barbarians, who were already celebrating something, and they kind of made a compromise in such a way that they said, since they're already celebrating something in December, around the winter solstice, and around the time that the seasons change, that would be a good time that we could interject the birth of Christ there. That's how we started doing December. Had nothing to do with the time Jesus was born, because all we know, he was born. We know if we study Hebrew and their times and their months, which we had to do, he was not born during the time that it was a winter season. I don't try to introduce all of the months of the year that the Hebrews had, because that would be more confusion onto what you already know. I will say before we end, I'm going to try to tell you how we got our days and months mixed up. But I will say that the reason why we have December is the Roman Catholic Church, who is in charge of the Christian religion. They are the ones who tried to bring in barbaric people and let them compromise and keep their holy time, and they just inserted Christ. That would be the time he was born. They'll be celebrating their stuff and Jesus at the same time. They did the same thing with Easter. While the people in Europe were celebrating something around the change of the season, when you come to spring, the season change and brown stuff starts turning green and everything starts reawakening. So they inserted Easter time during that time. That Easter itself is a pagan holiday. We who are Christians know that that's the resurrection. But Easter is the goddess who was responsible for refertilization and the change of the season. So that's where the Easter comes from. So the Roman Catholic Church is the one that kind of inserted those two great holidays, Christmas and Easter, that was infiltrated with pagan holidays already in place. And so they still wore their colors that represented the change from the brown dead to the green newness of life, and the Easter eggs, fertility, and the bunny rabbit, fertility, and all of that got incorporated into it, and it overshadowed his crucifixion by it was already a holiday anyway. The Jews, they still celebrate their Passover, but their Passover doesn't always hit the same time as we celebrate Easter. Even though when he was crucified, it did hit during that Passover week, but their Passover week stays the same. We fluctuate ours based on the first full moon and the season change. Actually, that's what it's based on. I hope somebody asks me some questions. Have y'all ever heard this before? Yeah, okay. I didn't know if I was just saying something that nobody had ever heard. But that is why people, like I said, who already know this outside the church, they say, y'all celebrating pagan holidays. Well, if you know the truth will make you free. That's not what you're celebrating. We're celebrating the birth of Christ during December because we designated that to be his birthday, since I don't know when it was. We just said this, that some people, if you don't know when somebody's birthday was, we'll say, well, let's pick a date and we'll have your celebration. Or you might know when it is, but we say we're gonna choose this Saturday to be your birthday. That's what pretty much we did. But we're acknowledging Christ and not the pagan holiday that originally was done. Question, comment. The Christmas tree, of course, like I said, came from Germany. Germany had actually, they're the ones who started talking, it was not necessarily the Germans. The Dutch are the ones who used Father Christmas, and the other name that they brought out for this gift giver, an elderly man who gave out gifts. All of that comes from either the Netherlands or from Germany. Let me see. St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas, he is mainly those individuals who were Catholic. That's where he comes from. St. Nicholas is of German American, of German descent. St. Nicholas, he was a bishop who died on December 6, 343 AD, and it was Germanic, and it was said that he would disguise himself, and he would ride a white horse, he would ride a reindeer, a mule, or even a goat, depending on which country he was going across. His name was called Claus, Nickel, and a German name that I can't pronounce. And he was the one who was giving out gifts. So all of this got kind of incorporated into Christmas. Nothing about Christ. Nothing about Christ. So that's why I'm saying that we see a secular Christ who, the man in the red suit, is pretty much the main character. And that wasn't invented until 1800s in America. And the one who designed that particular Santa Claus that we know of was a man named Thomas Nast, who was a cartoonist. He was a cartoonist. He's also responsible for the Uncle Sam, the old Uncle Sam cartoon. He did that. He also is the one who did the donkey that represents a political party. No, he did the elephant. Somebody else did the donkey, but he did the elephant, and he was famous. He made this a part of Harper's Bazaar, Harper's Weekly, and eventually that became what all other cartoonists started making Santa Claus look like. And by the time it got into the 1900s, the Macy's people and people who ran department stores, they had made a Santa Claus for their purpose for promoting buying toys and all of that. That's where that came from. Okay, what else do I have on there? The original Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, was born in Turkey in the 4th century. That's who they said he was the original. That was in the 4th century, but it was Constantine who was the emperor in Rome, and he allowed this man Nicholas to go free. And Nicholas became a delegate, and he represented Sicily, Greece, and Russia. And the Dutch kept the legend of St. Nicholas alive. And in the 16th century, Dutch children would place their wooden shoes by the hearth in hopes that they would get a treat. And that Dutch Nicholas was translated into Saint Nicholas. And by the time it got to Anglican, it was changed to Santa Claus. In 1820, a famous poem was written by Clement Moore, A Visit from Saint Nick, which was later published as The Night Before Christmas. That was in 1822. We started hearing a description of who Santa Claus is, and he's been with us ever since. How something commercially, the commercial people made him big. People who sell stuff around December, they made him famous. And the Macy's parade and all that kind of things. Questions, comments? So those are things you can look up on the internet, but they won't say nothing about Jesus in any of that. That's why I made sure we got the truth first. And then, because there's always more stuff about the commercial meaning of Christmas than the biblical meaning of Christmas. All right. Now, I'm going to just, since we have a few minutes left, I'm going to tell you some things that you probably already know and some things you looked at and you wondered about. We got 7 days in our week, is that right? Have you ever wondered why they're called what they're called? Because they don't match. They don't seem to follow any kind of particular, if you got days of the week, there ought to be kind of something that goes with it, something that tells you why they're there like they are. The only ones that have a meaning are Sunday and Monday. The rest of them don't. I'm going to tell you what they are so you won't ever wonder about it again. Sunday, of course, is the Sunday, and Monday is the moon day. That's straight. Now, when you get to Tuesday, Tuesday is named after a Norse god. And we're going to get through this whole thing, then I will explain to you more. A Norse god, who is the Norse god of war, named Tyr, T-I-U, a Norse god of war. And that became Tuesday. Wednesday is named after Woden, who is the Norse god, the father of Thor. You see where I'm going? Because Thursday is Thor. That's Woden's son. Y'all do look at Thor, the movie, right? They don't talk about Woden much, but Woden is Thor's father. And Anthony, what's his name? He's Thor's father in the movie. Anthony Perkins. What's his name? Let's see his name. Well, anyway, he's Thor's father, Woden, and who is? Yeah. I think his name is Anthony, but he plays Thor's father, and Woden is who that is. And Friday is Frida, who is the Norse goddess of love. That's where Friday comes from. Saturday is from the planet Saturn, which is the god, the Roman god of fertility. So, if you got those 7 days, they don't match up in any way. They're not all of the same nationality. They're not all of, you would think they ought to be the same. They ought to be all Latin. They ought to be all Greek, but they're not. They're mixed up because we can go back to the Roman Catholic Church, who's responsible for getting this like this. You can go back and see how they compromised to make those holy days based on pagan times. They did this days calendar also to appease individuals who were not necessarily of Roman descent. The only thing they got in here Roman is Saturday. But they got these are the days of the week. Y'all want me to do it again? You got Sunday, the sun day, the moon day, and you got the Norse god of war. When we're talking about Norsemen, we're talking about Europe. We're talking about, actually that would be Western Europe, right? Western Europe. And they were a lot of pagans there that the Romans always wanted to make a part of the Roman Catholic Church. And over a period of time, all of Europe was a part of the Roman Catholic Church. But it took a while to get all of those Norsemen, Scandinavian people, and all of them in Germanic people. All of those were barbaric. But they had to do something to get them submissive to the will of Rome. Rome no longer had its authority as an army, but they became the church. And the church became stronger than their Roman Empire. The church ruled all of Europe, all of Africa. They did not ever conquer Europe. Asia. They never did get much out of Asia. But they did do all of Europe, most of Africa, before the 600s. In the 600 ADs, Muslims came and took over all of that. We'll talk about that at some point in time. Questions so far? This may not even be interesting, but I just want you to know it anyway. Now, your months. We got 12 months. But if anybody looking at the 12 months would see that it's mixed up and messed up. Case in point, September, October, November, December is 7, 8, 9, 10. I'll say that again. September is 7, October is 8, November is 9, December is 10. Based on their prefix, that's what they are. All right, now, a person, just looking at this will see that that's wrong. How in the world December is the 12th month, but December is the prefix is the same as a decimal and the same as on un, deux, trois, sept, six, huit, neuf, deux. So 7, September, October, November, December in the Romance languages, that's 7, 8, 9, 10. But what happened is the Roman Empire had 10 months, and they would always have something left over. So they had a whole month that was left over, and when that leftover year came, they would have a special celebration during that month. But here's what happened to mess them up. Julius Caesar said, I want a month named after me. And so they got July, named after Julius Caesar. The Caesar after him was named Augustus Caesar. I want a month named after me. And so we got August. So we got July and August inserted in the middle, but then over time, they still had to, once they incorporated these other European countries in, they had to get something that represented them too. You just can't have all Roman stuff in there if you're going to try to get people in Europe to be a part of it. So let's look at it. January is named after the Janus, a Roman god named Janus. You can look all the gods up because the Romans had a set of gods and the Greeks had a set of gods. They were the same gods with different names. But Janus was the Roman god, and the word February means to purify. That used to be that month that was left over. That's why it's still the shortest month. That's when they did a whole year, they had some days left over, so they had a separate month. In the old Roman calendar, that would have been the last month of the year. I know it's confusing, but I'm trying to tell you because anybody looking at this, a child just starting school and they learning how to count in French and Spanish, they say, how in the world you get to the end and you got sept, huit, neuf, deux, and you got the wrong numbers attached to them. Okay, let me keep going. January, the Roman god Janus. Latin means, February means to purify, and that's where they take a whole month to get your stuff in order. They didn't have any thing attached to that, but that's the way it was. But then when they made the new calendar, they made it the second month. The third month is Mars, after the planet Mars, which the planet Mars is the Roman god of war. Originally, it was the first month of the Roman calendar, but because of the compromise, they had to kind of fix it. So it's now the third month. So Mars is a Roman god, and we have a planet. Most of the planets, the planets, some of them are named after Roman gods if you take the time to look at it. But we're not going to do the planets now. But they done took some out. Since I've been to school, they done erased some of them. They say Pluto not a planet now, so I'm going to leave that alone. When I was going to school, Pluto was a planet. Now they say it's not a planet. Okay. April is a Latin word that means to open. So to open means that that's the time when it seemed like the whole season changed. And that word April means to open, so the seasons are changing. And May is the goddess of spring. So April is opening up, and May is the goddess of spring. and it is also the Roman goddess of spring. Juno is a Roman goddess of marriage. That's why people get married in June. They stuck that right there in June. And it is based on the Roman goddess of marriage, Juno. Then I told you that 7, they just stuck Julius Caesar in the middle of it and Augustus Caesar in the middle of it, and they tried to keep the rest of it like it was. They done messed it up now. And September, which is supposed to be the 7th month, is now, it's the 9th month. October is supposed to be the 10th month. That's the 8th. That was originally, October is an octopus. That's 8. November is originally the 9th month, and December, where we get all decimals, are based on tens, but they made it 12. They didn't, in other words, they didn't change them. They just inserted 2 months in front of it, so they just moved them down. So you can't go by that to count. Do y'all hear what I'm saying? You know, because a person who's just learning this and seeing, okay, we get down to September, October, and November, and we know, people studying and who can count in different languages, they know that that is wrong, but we can't change it now because they got it set in stone. Just like we messed up. Remember I told you we messed up the way we count years because the Romans, once again, the Roman Empire came to Roman Catholic Church. They are the ones who decided that they were going to make Jesus, his birth, the beginning of the way we count years. So whenever Jesus was born, that would be the beginning. Anything before him would be before Christ. Anything after him would be in the year of our Lord, Annos Dominus. And who did I say that they got that from? How did they determine? These scholars who were religious scholars in about the 3rd century, how did they determine they were going to find this information out about when Jesus was born? All right. Somebody, I heard it. They had to find out where to find in the Bible when Jesus was born. All right. That's what Herod had to find out. He found it from the wise man. But where do scholars who've already got this written down? They already have a Bible in place with the 66 books in it. How did they determine? How did they find when Jesus was born that they could find a year to make sure that they could put it on the right year?
Oh, they said it was. They said somebody. I want to say Preston. Said somebody was Preston, but it was.
All right. So where do we find that? In Luke, the Gospel according to Luke. That's why I went through that study about Luke and how that Luke was always kind of like a historian. He had stuff you could document. Well, these scholars, 325 years after all of these writers were dead, they went back and looked at what he had written and they said that let's go back and see when Cyrenius was governor. Let's go back and see when Augustus was Caesar. And they could find in the books, in the record books, that this was the year. And they actually picked a good year. They picked a real time that they could actually calculate and say that Cyrenius was governor and Augustus was the emperor. And they said, this is the date we're going to put down. We're going to erase all of our calendar and everything. Their year was already 700 some years in the year of the Roman Empire. And they erased all of that. They say we're just going to use when Jesus was born, even though now we are 300 years after that. And they changed all the documents and everything. And then another scholar came along and said, wait a minute, Cyrenius was governor more than one time. And Caesar Augustus, all of them were Caesars. Caesar Augustus, he overlapped him twice. So which year do we choose as the year that Jesus was born, since he was there are two situations. And so if you would look up, somebody look it up right now. When was Jesus born? Look up on your phone right now. Google, when was Jesus born? Now you would think if we're going to do it right, it ought to be somewhere like 1 or 0. You got to have a starting point. So what does Google say? Okay, they say the 25th of Christmas of December, but that don't tell us a year.
Yeah, it don't say.
What does it say? Okay, you see what I'm talking about? They just got it wrong. No, they're telling it right. Google is telling it the way that it is, but they got it wrong when they calculated. Because I said that Cyrenius was governor more than one term, they looked at this term and said that's when Jesus was born, and they should have looked at this term to determine that. And because they did not determine it right, we're stuck with that date that they determined. Men did that. That ain't got nothing to do with God. But now in all of our books, it's going to say, because they didn't get it right, between 4, sometimes say from 3 to 5, 3 to 6 BC. So they're putting Jesus' birth before he was born. I know that's confusing, but we know the truth. We know the truth. The truth is we don't know. We don't know when he was born. But they're trying to figure it out, and they went based on what Luke was saying. And yes, they got within the ballpark because Luke wrote that way. But Luke, they should have asked Luke to put down what term the Cyrenius, because he served 2 terms. They should have said in the second term that Cyrenius was governor, then they would have got the year right. That's confusing, but I'm telling you the way it is. They got it wrong, and whenever you look it up now, we can't correct it. So if we look at the date today, it is 2025, and it's supposed to be AD behind it. They don't never put that, but that's what we are. If we didn't do that, then how would we distinguish it between 2025 before Christ? That was 2025 before now. So this 2025 is AD. There was a 2025 BC. But either one of them is wrong because we're using the wrong measuring stick. Because we didn't get the measure, we didn't get the actual prime, we didn't get the anchor in the right place. So that's where everything else after that is wrong, according to the history books. I hope I didn't muddy the water too much, but I hope that maybe you will look at some else and you'll find that they just did it wrong. And that was religious scholars trying to pinpoint when Jesus was born based on Luke's gospel. And Luke's gospel is the closest thing to a historical document that you can find in the Bible. But they won't try to do it for history. They're trying to do it so that you can acknowledge that it actually happened and not just something that was just said. Because Matthew and John, they don't give you any dates or any depiction of when and where. They just tell you that this happened. And you don't know when it happened. But Luke is the one that tries, because Luke was writing to who? Who was Luke writing to? The educated people, the Greeks, who are going to question that. They're people who know Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. You can't tell them anything. So Luke had to tell them some facts. And he gave them some facts. They just didn't calculate it right when they looked back at it 300 years later. That's when they started putting this time that we got now. That was 300, 400 years after Jesus and all of them were dead. Because Jesus came back. Okay, that's all we can do tonight. And all right, question. Is what? Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the same Thor. I used to read about Thor, and they done made about 4 movies about Thor, and he had a brother who is a god as who is an equal person. And his daddy was Roland, his mama was Frida, and those are incorporated into our days of the week. Okay. All right. I hope she heard the answer. Yes. Yes, that's the same one that they write about in the comic books. Okay. Yeah, that's about 3 or 4 movies now about Thor. All right. He's a part of the I don't know what this super crew is that Samuel L. Jackson. He's the leader of it. The Marvel comic. Yeah. All right. If we could stand and have a word of prayer. And my fellow county commissioner, it's always sad when a commissioner dies in office, and he was one of my fellow commissioners in the North County, passed away last night. Give us a word of prayer.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you.
Thank you, Lord.
For gathering in this evening, Father, Lord, Son, and Word, Father. Lord, we realize that as we were studying, Heavenly Father, there's various questions, Lord. Lord, we thank you for your answer to give us those to enlighten us, Father, even more as we continue to study about you, Father. Lord, we realize, Father, that we're not come to close of our Bible studies for this year, Father. Lord, we thank you for giving us the courage, giving us the strength, and Lord, may God be safe as we made our way out of here, Father. Lord, we ask you to bless each and everyone that's on the sound of my voice, Father. And we also ask you to bless those online, Lord. Lord, we ask you to bless us, give us a safe travel grace, Father. Take us back to our homes, Father, in the same condition we have not left, Lord. Lord, we just thank you for your angels that you dispatch around us, Father. Lord, that they keep your people from lurking within, Father.
Have your way, Lord.
We realize that they'll come to kill, steal, and destroy, Father, if you have an open system, Father. Lord, we thank you for what you've done, what you do, what you just come to do, Father. And Lord, until we meet again, we say thank you, Father. These things in Jesus' name, Lord, I pray. Amen.
Amen. I've got a sheet that has the days and the months. You won't find this anywhere together. You start researching, you'll find what I'm saying is true, but I compiled it. Yeah. Everybody may not want. I don't want nobody to have it. They don't want it. Give it to somebody else.
I'm pretty sure you got the time, so you just email it online.
I don't have it. This is old. This is old. I was doing this in Bible study some years back.